Hi, today we are going to, on our Training Tuesday series, we are going to talk about the Form 22A. And I would like to start on this page. This is when you first log into the Northwest MLS. And I want to show you how to find the forms manual again so that you can always reference back if I'm not right here, or if it's a form we haven't covered yet, I'd like you to feel that you're not lost, that you're able to locate exactly what's needed. So let's go ahead and do that again. From the home screen, we will click Express Forms. And now at the top, you'll see Forms Manual. You will see all the forms that you may need. The Forms Manual is great because it will tell you how to use it and when to use it. So I would like to talk about the 22A. We've had a couple problems with that lately. So let's talk about it. Now, when I click or when I write 22A in the search bar, I'll do it again. When I write 22A in the search bar and I search, it comes up with the actual form and also the form manual. So the form manual has the form in it after it goes through explanation. So I'm going to open the manual. Now, the 22A is the financing addendum, and this should be added if your client needs to get financing. So if they are not paying cash from their own bank account, that means that they are needing financing. Now, you don't always have to include the 22A if somebody's getting financing. This is a contingency. So that means that we want to include the 22A if they could not follow through with the sale if they don't get financing. So let me say that again. I'll say it in a different way. If we have buyer Bob and he went to Academy Mortgage and got a pre-approval, and he knows that there are multiple offers on this property. So here's buyer Bob. He knows there's multiple offers on this property. He went and got pre-approved through Brenda Thornbrew at Academy Mortgage. Okay, so that's the scenario. And he's decided that he actually doesn't care about his earnest money. Let's use that example. He doesn't really care about his earnest money. He's putting $2,000 down, good faith, and he doesn't care if he loses that. So he does not want to include the 22A. Is that legit? Can he do that? Can he submit an offer that he's getting lending for without having a contingency upon lending? And the answer is yes. Yes, he can. We do want to let the other party know, however, that there will be financing involved, right? We just want to let him know that there are financing, but it's not contingent on him getting financing. Now, if you don't do a financing contingency in the example of buyer Bob, the other party, the listing agent, is probably going to require proof of funds to show that they can close it. That is going to be where the problem occurs if he doesn't have proof of funds, but not making it contingent upon financing. So that's a little bit of a loophole that I want you guys to be aware of. You don't have to include it, but you do have to let them know that there's financing with the pre-approval letter. And that's a risk that the buyer's taking. If it doesn't go through, they're going to lose their earnest money. It's a strategy and definitely a loophole. More traditionally, what we encounter is that, let's use buyer Billy. Okay, buyer Billy comes to the table with a pre-approval. He wants to make sure he can get his earnest money back if the financing doesn't go through. Therefore, we are including the 22A. Okay, the 22A will provide a security net for our buyers if they are getting financing. And I always recommend that we do that. If there is financing involved, let's add a 22A to the contract. So, if you read A under the general comments, and we will see if, hopefully this will pull up. Okay, here we're in A. This addendum is to be attached to a purchase and sale agreement when the sale is conditioned on buyer obtaining financing. Okay. Earnest money. If buyer has not waived, let's go to B right here. If buyer has not waived the financing contingency and is unable to obtain financing by closing after a good faith effort, buyer must provide seller with notice of termination using the buyer's notice of termination. Financing unavailable, Form 90. Okay. So if we use this form, what this is saying is, if we use this form and the buyer has done everything they can and they can't get financed. So a good example of that is Cushman. Sometimes we get into the 23rd hour and we can't get financing, but we've tried. We've exhausted all resources and we cannot get financing. Then the buyer, if we used Form 22A and then we let the seller know of the termination, at that point, the buyer will get back their earnest money. Okay, now we go to, I'm just showing you also how the forms manual works. So next, it's going to have the assistance filling in the blanks. It goes line by line what we should fill in, and I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so you can see what this looks like. They actually give you the form with the numbers. This is heaven sent. Please use these forms manuals, the forms manual for all of your forms if you have any questions on how to fill in a form. Okay, so I'm scrolling back up here. Date of purchase and sale agreement. So that is going to be the date of the offer. We will include, when we're writing an offer, we will include the 25 or 21, depending if it's vacant land or if it is residential. We'll include that. And then where it asks for the addendum that's going to be included, this is where we're going to put that 22A. Okay, now we insert the date of the offer on the top of this form, and then you insert the buyer seller name. Now that pre-populates for us typically if we start Matrix, like when we're writing an offer. You know, if we start Transaction Desk through Matrix when we're writing the offer, not to be confused when we are listing a home, but when we're writing an offer, it'll pre-populate all of this information. The property address will be pre-populated. Financing, you'll select the type of financing for which the buyer is the application. Most of the time, our pre-approval letters will tell us if it's FHA, conventional, VA, what type of loan it is. That's where we'll put that in. Now, as a reminder, very typically VA is 0% down, FHA is 3.5% down, and conventional can be any number. So just as a reminder, that's what you're looking at. And it will tell you on the pre-approval. If it doesn't, or if you don't understand something, please feel free to reach out to the lender. We should have open communications with the lender throughout the entire transaction. Okay? Down payment. So this would be that 3.5%. You can put it as a percent or as a dollar amount. So let's say that they're using Brenda. I text Brenda and I say, how much are they putting down? And she's like, oh, they're going to put $15,000 down. That's okay. It doesn't have to be a percent. It can be $15,000. The loan application deadline. This is 5 days typically. Now this is a date that you need to make sure you put in your calendar if you're using a 22A. The loan application has to be complete, meaning that all of their paperwork that's being requested from the lender is in to the lender within the 5 days. If they fail to do that, then there's a waiver of the financing contingency. That's really important. Time is of the essence with all of our real estate forms. Make sure that we're writing down those dates. Okay, so number 9, insert the number of days the seller must wait to deliver the request for loan information, the Form 22AL. Every time brokers get this for the first time. Every time you see a 22AL come across your desk, the very first time, it is going to throw you into a tizzy. They look really scary. They're not really scary. They're requesting loan information or they can terminate. This is a really great form for sellers and it keeps them up to date as to what is going on with the process, okay? So don't worry when you get the 22AL, simply give them the information. Make sure that you are in touch with the lender for your buyer and you know what is going on. Okay. And I always give free rein. I always want the the listing agent and the seller to have access to the lender, because if they're comfortable with what's going on with lending, the transaction is going to go much smoother. So don't hold that information, share it. Seller's right to terminate. And then you will see this is all in the lingo. Termination notice, waiver of appraisal. We don't want to waive that appraisal. So appraisal less than sale price, Section 7 contains an appraisal contingency. This is important because we don't have to add, there is a separate form, an appraisal contingency form. But the 22A covers that appraisal contingency. And then your initials and dates. So let's look at what this looks like. We did skip a very important one that I'm going to go back to with a couple examples. So this is what our 22A looks like. And here's the loan application waiver of contingency. Loan information. Seller's right to terminate. Then your appraisal that we were talking about right here. Number four, loan cost provisions. So, there are fees that are associated with selling your house. And we will go over how to find out what those fees are with our financial tools in the Northwest MLS. When you're selling a house, you have excise tax. You have prorated real estate taxes. You have the title insurance fee. That title insurance, remember, covers the new owner from anybody coming and saying that they have ownership rights. Okay, so that title insurance, the seller typically pays that. The seller will pay half of the recording, what we call the closing costs, the closing costs as far as with the closing agent. So we have recording fees, we have the escrow fee, we have those fees, and those are split 50-50 between the seller and buyer. And nothing is needed to be done to make that happen. Now, on the buyer side, if they are receiving financing, they have an appraisal fee that they have to pay. If they need to buy down points, that could be 1% of the loan amount. They're going to have the prepaid property taxes as well, the prorations of the property taxes. They're going to have homeowners insurance, and they have to pay the first month up front. So they're going to have these homeowner insurance policy premiums. So the seller and the buyer each have these costs associated with either selling the home or buying the home. And these are what we refer to as closing costs. And I'll go into more detail on that with real true examples. In a typical transaction, the seller covers the seller's closing costs and the buyer covers the buyer's closing costs. No problem. We don't have to write anything. This is what happens. This is standard. If we are dealing with a VA buyer or an FHA buyer, so if their loan type is VA or FHA, we want to make sure that we ask them and the lender if they are going to need help close with their closing costs. Remember, their closing costs are specific to their lending. So the appraisal fee, buying down points, those two are big for lending. And also, if there's prorations, they can cover that. What about if we did the inspection, we're rolling it into the loan or rolling into the closing costs, the inspection fees, those types of things. The seller would prefer that the buyer pays cash. So these are specific to the buyer getting financing and has nothing to do with the seller. So those are their closing costs. And I'll show you in the next video where to find how we can do these calculations. Okay. However, going back, if the buyer is obtaining FHA or VA financing, they may not have any cash. That is when we have to ask the seller to help them with closing costs. It's only when the buyer has no cash to cover closing costs. Okay. So we will ask the lender if the buyer needs to have some closing costs, if they need this to ask the seller to cover some closing costs. If yes, this is where we put it. If the buyer doesn't have money to cover their own closing costs, we will ask the seller to help them, and it will be right here on number 4. Okay, this is where a lot of confusion happens. It's the first line on the second page of the 22A. Please pay attention to this. We are going to go into some really great examples and some more details about closing costs. But right now, to get us through this form, that's where it goes if the buyer doesn't have money and needs closing costs covered. Okay, and then what we talked about with appraisal, less than sale price right here. And we have to do a notice of low appraisal if it comes in low. And then the seller's response, and then the buyer's reply. It reminds me of a 35R. You have notice of low appraisal starts with the buyer. It always starts with the buyer's agent, okay, the selling agent. So if we're representing the buyer, it starts with us. We do notice of low appraisal when we write what the appraisal is, right, how much it came in at. Now the seller gets to respond to that and say what they're going to do. And then we can reply to what they say, right? So as a buyer, we have options if the appraisal doesn't come in. Number 1, we can run. We can leave the transaction and walk away. Number 2, we can renegotiate with the seller, and hopefully they bring that purchase price down to the appraised value. Or number 3, we can cover with cash the amount, the difference between the appraised value and the offer value, okay? So those are our 3 options as a buyer. The seller also has options. The seller can say, I'm doing nothing. The seller can say, I'm dropping the purchase price some, or I'm going to drop the purchase price to appraised value. Those are the options from both sides. Okay, so now once we have this filled out, we're representing the buyer at this point, then we initial the bottom of page 2. We go on to page 3. And it talks about the FHA, VA, USDA appraisal certificate. Remember, FHA and VA appraisals follow the home. So if there is a low appraisal for FHA or VA, it's going to follow it throughout the sale. And the extension of closing. So this is the 22A. This is how to use it. Please be mindful on how to find the form manual. So any form that you need to look up and you need a manual for, you can do it at midnight. I'm typically asleep at midnight, so please utilize the tools and resources that we have. Thanks, guys. Hope this helps. Talk to you soon.